So our food is our future. Essentially, the way we choose to eat will impact how our planet looks like in yogurt, which also is a source of protein that warms our planet a lot. Then we get down into poultry products like chicken and turkey, which have less of a carbon footprint. But then we get into some of the plant-based sources. So we have our Impossible and Beyond Meat burgers, which are plant-based imitation meats. Now these are expensive and these are new and these are hard to find, but they do have a lower carbon footprint. And then we get to the very bottom, probably the most eco-friendly protein source, which is a veggie burger protein source, as in beans. Beans are very good for the environment. They have a very low carbon footprint. So that can be something that we consider as to what we should be eating. So what is our beef with beef? Americans consume a lot of beef a year. There's a lot of numbers on this slide, but it's okay, I will break them down. So Americans consume a lot of beef every year, and beef has a huge carbon footprint, and this comes from methane. So cows emit gas that basically warms our planet a lot. Fertilization, basically the stuff we put in the soil to make things grow better, that's really bad for the environment. And then we cut down trees, so we cut down the forests to make space for farms, for these huge factory farms. And when we cut down trees take in carbon and they help our planet be cooler. So when we cut them down, it also contributes to global warming. So obviously it would be easy if people just reduce their beef consumption, but it's not that simple. So over here we have some maps that show, on the left side we see maps that show that there are some people who just don't have access to grocery stores. They live too far away, they don't have cars to get there. So it's hard for them to buy and eat healthy foods and environmentally friendly foods. And on the right, we see the health effects that it has. So you can be more susceptible to obesity and diabetes if you don't have access to healthy food. And this is a social justice problem too, because it affects low income people, so people who aren't really rich. And it also affects people who are Black, Indigenous, or people of color. So if we see this patch over here, I don't know if you can see my cursor. Over here, this is the Navajo Nation. Indigenous people, and they don't really have access to healthy food, which is really unfortunate. So it's not that easy to just tell people to eat more sustainably. But Americans do eat a lot of burgers from fast food restaurants, and that emits a lot of carbon. Assuming we eat this many burgers, this is how much carbon it emits. And fast food restaurants are big, powerful companies who really have a lot of power to do something about our climate, because they are the ones who hold the power, not the individuals who are just trying to feed their families and get by, but these people. And fast food burgers make a sizable chunk of food's carbon footprint. So if this is the carbon footprint, this over here shows how much of it comes from fast food burgers, which is a lot. So what if fast food restaurants participated in Meatless Mondays? What if every Monday they decided to switch out their beef burger for a black bean burger? Then 1/7 of all of our burgers would be these lower carbon footprint, more eco-friendly, environmentally friendly burgers. And it would be easier for them to do it because fast food restaurants have a lot of money and they have a lot of resources, and it's very easy for them to make these changes. Then this would save so much carbon emissions. This number right here is the amount of carbon emissions that would save if fast food restaurants decided to do something about the problem. And this is the equivalent to a lot of things. It's the equivalent of driving less, is the equivalent of recycling trash instead of putting it into the landfill. And we all have heard the phrase reduce, reuse, recycle. That is a phrase that's very important to protect our environment. So reducing the amount of meat we consume is the equivalent of also putting less stuff in the trash. And it also is the equivalent of planting this much forest. So forests are really important in cooling our planet and taking up carbon and making sure global warming doesn't go out of control. So all this is a really good carbon sink. And then there's another really cool thing about why beans are so good for the environment. And they basically just don't need as much fertilizer. They're able to live side by side with bacteria that help them get fertilizer. And fertilizer is really bad for the environment. It's really hard to produce fertilizer. It messes up the balance of our world. So it's very good that beans are sort of able to produce their own fertilizer by living side by side with bacteria that help them with that. And that's a very valuable agricultural process that makes beans a promising crop for food. And it's an excellent source of protein. But just some perspective and a reality check, we have to cut agricultural emissions by at least half, if not even more, to protect our planet from warming too much. And our calculated reduction is only this tiny slice of it. So it's a start. It's a small amount, but it is a start. And fast food companies really do have the power to change something with this change right here. And now we're thinking about how powerful the fast food companies are. Where else can they make an impact? Well, food waste is something that is super bad for the environment. If you think about it, wasting food is not good, right? Because food is a precious resource and we don't want to be wasting it. But industrial processes like the fast food industry waste a lot. In fact, food waste is worse for the environment than the airline industry, and that is saying a lot. And a big chunk of that is caused by industries who are able to recklessly waste food because they're rich and powerful. But imagine if they use that wealth and power to instead reduce food waste. That would be so good for the environment. And fast food industry is also very reliable on factory farming, which sort of keeps cows and animals closely packed together. So it's really bad for the animals, but also factory farms have contributed to mass deforestation. So cutting down a lot of trees, like I mentioned before, trees are very important to protect the environment and keep the climate cool. And antibiotic resistance as well. When you have the cows so close together, they get sick more easily and they transmit sickness more easily. Now, we've all been in a pandemic for the past year and a half. We know how important it is to not transmit sickness, but if you keep cows packed close together, they transmit sickness to each other, and some of that sicknesses can also infect humans. So factory farms are not only bad for the environment and for the animals, but they're also bad for our health as people. And the fast food industries have a real power to reduce the demand for this and save multiple facets. And lastly, fast food does influence how we choose to eat. If fast food makes healthy and sustainable food more accessible, if they have more options that are healthy and sustainable, then it will be easier for those people mentioned before who don't have access to a grocery store, who don't have time to cook, who maybe don't have the money to spend on fancy, healthy food at Whole Foods. These people now have access to sustainable and healthy food, and they are able to make the choices much more easily without having to go out of their way or spend way too much money. And this can also help change public opinion. While there are some people who can't eat more sustainably because they just can't, like they live too far away from the store, there are other people who just simply think it's too hard. But this can make people realize that eating sustainable and healthy and cutting down on our meat consumption doesn't have to be a big task. It doesn't have to be a horror show. It can actually be fun, and it can actually be very good for our health and expanding the type of food that we eat. And people will be more open, if the fast food industries lead, to make more sustainable choices. So a common phrase that we hear is corporations telling us that we have the power to make sustainable choices. But to be honest, our power is small compared to what they have. So it's very important that our policymakers don't push us to do certain things as much as they push industries to do certain things, because that's where the power really lies. All right, thank you so much. And I can take your questions now.
Thank you so much, Shruti. How'd you guys like that talk? That's amazing, right? Thank you so much for just shifting perspective too into, what we traditionally believe in and what's really based on scientific facts as well. Okay. Yeah. Thank you, Nahalia. Nahalia, amazing. Thank you so much. Thank you for that. Nahalia also said travel, hotel, etc. Supermarkets, faster places. Dang, I love that. I love that. Okay. Everyone's saying thank you. Jen said thank you. Gam said thank you. Oh, Nahali has a question here. Thank you for your question. Guys, if you have a question, feel free to type in the chat and we can ask Shruti, okay? The question is, actually, Nahalia, are you here? Would you mind unmute yourself and ask that question, or would you want me to ask the question? Example, I can't unmute. I got you. I got you. So her question is, right, Shruti, do we have lots of power as the consumers? And for example, how I give an example, like don't buy ivory so they don't stop killing elephants and things like that. What's your perspective on that?
So I believe that consumers have power to a certain extent, but like I mentioned before, choice is sort of a luxury. So if you're not rich,
too much money. Thank you.
Yeah, no, I totally agree about that. Like, humans have been consuming meat throughout our history. It just has never been on this level before. Like, early humans, like early indigenous peoples, they would consume meat, but they would like sort of farm and hunt everything that they consumed in a very sustainable way.
Exactly, because they had to go. It took so much energy for them to chase down the poor animal that's running for its life that they want to eat, and they're using rudimentary, like nice tools they hand make them. And then everybody was doing like that slash and burn horticulture, or they were just doing their backyard potatoes and their farmings and their kind of gardening. So the meats thing on the industry level that it is now is kind of outrageous.
Yeah.
Shruti, thank you so much for your question.
Yeah. Thank you guys. Thank you guys so much for the thoughtful conversation. That is so cool about virtual, right? That we can just raise our conversation to talk about ideas. And thank you guys for that. We also have one more raise of hands. I just want to remind ourselves that the next speaker is here, and we do want to take him back into consideration. But why don't we address this one last question or thought before the next speaker? So, hi Deborah, how are you? Hope you enjoyed the talk. You're muted, by the way. Sorry.
I am enjoying this immensely. My question is, does UCLA have an organization that addresses climate change where UCLA alumni or people affiliated like
Institute of Environmental and Sustainability is quite involved in like recommending environmental policy and sort of influencing environmentalism, mostly around LA. I'm not super clear on where, like if UCLA like leads environmental protests. They mostly do like studies and make recommendations and work with like local governments and municipalities to sort of encourage policies and like help, like for example, they help like DWP come up with like more sustainable water systems. You could go to ioes.ucla.edu for more information if you're interested, but that's sort of our main like branch of sustainability studies and like climate change studies around here.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Glad you enjoyed the talk.
Thank you. Thank you, Shruti. Would you mind just do a couple things to wrap up, to send the website that you said, sorry, I didn't catch it, to the chat? Yes, please. I think it can be, yeah, that's what I was thinking as well. And also, if you guys have any further questions, Shruti, would you mind leave your email maybe, or like the way to contact for people? I know that your talk must generate so many thoughts and so many great questions. Really enjoy you coming on today. Thank you for your time.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you guys. Hey, great first the experiment carried out at his lab at UCLA and explain why Earth's magnetic poles tend to align with planets' axes of rotation. It's very, very cool because I'm literally in the same building with the professor right now. And I'm very, very excited for this talk. So Professor, do you want to screen share or?
Yeah, I'll want to screen share. Eventually I'm going to show some slides.
Okay, so you're the co-host now, so feel free to screen share.
Great, awesome. I'm going to start off speaking. I just need to, I should be the primary screen so that I can show some stuff here too.
Okay, how about this? I'll just pin your screen then.
Sounds good.
Or pin or spotlight for everyone. Okay, so you're in the spotlight.
Awesome. Okay, welcome everybody. I'm here at EYU in my garage for hopefully our last Zoom EYU. Hopefully next year I'll see everybody on campus. And we're going to talk about Earth's magnetic field. And to do that, first we're going to talk for a little bit about magnets, okay? And so to do that, I'm going to show you guys a magnet. Okay, let me steal my camera. Let's hope this works. Welcome to my garage. Okay, this is a magnet. Oh, come on, focus. Focus, camera. Come on, you can do it. This is a magnet, and this side is the north, what's called the North Pole of the magnet, and this side is the South Pole of the magnet. I'm gonna put it down here, and we're now gonna start looking at the magnetic field coming out of this magnet. I wish this thing would decide to refocus. Come on, you. Oh well, so it goes. Now, oh, there it is. Oh, I figured it out. So what I've got next to the magnet is a really cool kind of compass. It's called a magneprobe, and it's a 3D compass. This little compass needle can point any direction it wants. It's not stuck flat like you have with a normal compass. It can point in all three directions in space. And so let's see how it points when we come near this big magnet. When we come near the top of it, our little compass, here, I'm gonna try and do this without letting the magnet, this is a super strong magnet, it tends to rip the little compass out from itself. It actually tends to break it. But what you can see is the magnet makes the compass line up straight above it. So it's in a little straight line. If I move over here, you can see it tips like that. And then if I move over here, oh, now it's flat. And now if I move over here, it's coming down here at this angle. Oh, and now here, it's straight up and down again. Do you see that? And now if I come to near the bottom, it's gone almost flat again. Oh, now it's starting to point in. And if I go here, it's straight in. So let me now connect all these lines. Ooh, they go like that. That's what's called a magnetic field line. It's sometimes called the magnetic line of force. It's the force that one magnet exerts on the other. This little compass is also a magnet. And what happens is, this is the North Pole of my big magnet, and it's attracted to the South Pole of the little compass magnet. And so that's the North Pole, that's the South Pole, and the magnetic field lines comes out in the north and goes back in the south. Now, let's do it somewhere else. Let's just do it up above. What happens? Oh, it does the same thing. Oh no, please don't break my magnet. Oh no. Okay, let's see if it broke it. No, it didn't break it yet. That magnet is super strong. It's stronger than I meant to. It's all I could find in my lab today. Okay, so now let's do it on the other side. And we'll start up here again. Oh, comes out straight, and then it tips over, and then it goes tipping this way, and then over here it's straight down again. Oh, and now it's, and oh, I broke it. Oh no, it's just what I was trying not to do. Okay, so that's awesome. Oh, this is why you should always do experiments, because they're fun and exciting and things break. So that's the shape of a magnetic field coming out of a permanent magnet, okay? It comes out from the North Pole, wraps around and comes in at the South Pole. Okay, now I am gonna, let's film this if we can. I'm gonna try to fix my little thing really quick, because I kind of want to show you the next thing, which requires it. And if I can't, well, so goes our lives.
Just noting that everyone's having so much fun. Thank you so much for this just real life, show and tell. How do you guys like it? Let us know in the chat. What do you guys think? It's so awesome. People said so funny, cool, awesome. That is so cool.
It'd be so much cooler if I can fix this darn compass, though. Wait. I almost had it.
He's got. Everyone says very cool. It's really interesting.
I wonder if I can do 25 minutes of me trying to fix the compass.
That'd be
special.
Science.
Yeah, that would be like science. This is what I do in the lab a lot. We build stuff and then we break it and then we fix it. And then we all go, oh, I hope I fix it sooner than later. It's just we don't often fix it in front of many people watching us.
That's true. That's true.
Okay, wait. Okay, wait. Can you push right there? Oh, I think you got it. Oh, yes.
Thank you. Oh.
Nope, harder.
There's almost there.
Nope. Okay, so wait, let's try one more time.
I'm not gonna use
any bad words if it doesn't work, I promise.
Okay.
Okay. Nope, didn't work. Okay, so maybe I can do it by hand. Oh, so now I'm gonna do this by hand. No,
Okay.
No, that didn't work. Let's see what happens if we do the big magnet. Oh, okay, so yeah, let's do this. You hold this. This is great. So instead of using the magnet probe, I'm gonna use the world's biggest neodymium hand magnet. Maybe not the world's, but a really big one. And we're gonna see how it aligns with a globe with a big magnet in it. And you see it also, just like our little compass, it flips as we go around. I'm not doing that. It's the magnetic field of this globe is torquing on this magnet, is grabbing it. And so it's pointing inward here at the top. And then as I move it down, it naturally flips just like our little compass did when we were next to this magnet. And it flips and it points the other way when we come in the bottom. So I have no idea if that was at all clear, but my point would be then that the field that you have coming out of Earth actually looks, at least from moderately far away, a lot like a normal magnet. That's crazy. So people for years and years and years thought that Earth maybe had a big permanent magnet, some huge version of this buried inside it. Okay, now we're going to turn to my slides a little because I want to show you some real data for Earth to test that idea. So I'm going to screen share. Share screen. There we go, sharing screen. And now I'm going to press play. Oh, why is Earth's magnetic field point north? Okay, so we're going to play with some magnets and then a globe. We just did, even though I brilliantly broke my compass while doing so. Kind of sad. Now we're going to talk about Earth's magnetic field. I want to know, is Earth's magnetic field similar to the permanent magnet? How is it similar and how is it different from the permanent magnet I just showed you guys? Okay, well, before we do anything else, playing with magnets or this, that, I want to get a couple of ideas out there. When we talk about a magnetic field pointing north, what do we mean? What we mean, when we're saying that, we're talking about two different things. There's geographic north. Geographic north basically tells you where is the point that Earth is spinning around. There are two spots on Earth, one the North Pole and two the South Pole, geographic poles, that Earth is spinning around. And if you're standing on those spots, you actually wouldn't move through space. If you were in those spots, you would rotate once a day, because Earth rotates once a day. So you'd rotate once a day, but you wouldn't move from your spot. That's what just happened. I rotated once, but I didn't actually move anywhere. But in contrast, if I were on the equator, I would actually be moving through space through a huge circle. That's the radius of the Earth in radius. So the poles are where Earth spins around. That's the north and south geographic pole. While the north and south magnetic pole are the spots on Earth where Earth's magnetic field either leaves the planet, that's the north magnetic pole, or comes back into the planet, that's the south magnetic pole. And amazingly, the magnetic poles tend to be located close to the geographic poles. That, at some 0th order level, that's why compasses work. Because when the little magnet in your compass points towards magnetic north or south, it's near geographic north. Okay? Okay, so Earth rotates about its geographic poles. That's very nice. And Earth's magnetic field comes in or out of its magnetic poles, like the poles of a magnet. Okay, so is Earth then a permanent magnet? Let's address that. This image shows a map of Earth, and on its surface, we've in color showed the strength of the magnetic field. So most of the field comes out actually in the south. Magnetic north, oh God, is in the southern hemisphere right now. So it comes out the south, wraps around, and goes in the north. So it's almost all red in the south and almost all blue in the north. So it looks a lot like the field coming from a permanent magnet. And this is the field estimated about 400 years ago. And in this movie, we're going to show how that field changes over time. Okay, so you can see where the field's most intense is moving, right? Right then it now looks, it's kind of blobby and moves around in these big blobs. There are about 2 big blobs in each hemisphere. It's a little bluer in northern Canada and in Siberia, and it moves around. So if it was a permanent magnet, would it move around like that? Could it? What do you think? Take a guess. No. If it were a permanent magnet, it would basically kind of stay fixed where it is. But it's moving around and it's evolving in time. And so then something's dynamically generating the magnetic field somewhere in or on Earth. So let's go over all the different possibilities. In this image, we're showing a cutaway of the Earth. And first, let's look at the ocean. Could the ocean generate Earth's magnetic field? Actually, there's no way to. It's not a good electrical conductor. Magnetic fields need electrical currents. They're not big enough in the ocean. Could it be that there's a lot of stuff in Earth's crust, which we live upon? Well, there's some magnetic material. There's some iron stuff in the crust, but not enough to explain Earth's magnetic field. It's too weak. And actually, it doesn't change in time. Those are permanent, roughly permanent magnets. Okay. The mantle, which is the outer part of the planet, rocky, too hot. It's too hot, so all the magnetism gets baked out, and it can't support electric currents. So no days there. Lastly, there's the liquid metal outer core. It's about half the size of the planet. It's shown there in orange, right there. It's about the size of Mars. There's a Mars-sized metal object inside Earth. And the fluid in there is moving around, and as it does, it grows and stretches and creates a changing magnetic field. That's where Earth's magnetic field comes from. Okay, so if that's where Earth's magnetic field comes from, then why is the field that's created there tend to line up with the North Pole? Well, we saw it. It's moving around, but it always keeps one magnetic pole in the north and one roughly in the south. So let's look at some experiments that we did in my lab. Here's a version, here's my version now of Earth's outer core in black. And here's an experiment. And we're gonna just dump some fluid into a tank that's not rotating in any way. Earth is, but this one's not. And the fluid just sinks. It looks very beautiful. That's just milk and water. It's gorgeous. It sinks down, it spreads out, but it doesn't really care so much about where Earth's poles of rotation are. So the fluid dynamics here don't really care about the North Pole of the Earth. But if we rotate our tank and do the same experiment, look what happens. Ooh, same exact experiment. Slightly dense water, milk going into water. So the dense stuff tries to sink, but now it sinks along a perfectly aligned column. So the fluid acts now like a big gyroscope. And it's like a spinning top, and it's like a fluid spinning top. So all the fluid gets wrapped around, and all the motions align with the rotation axis of Earth, or in this case, of our experiment. And so here's the next big leap. The magnetic field is generated by the motions in Earth's liquid metal outer core. However, the flow in the core is aligned north-south by the rotation of the planet. And so when those motions generate the magnetic field is aligned north-south as well. That's crazy. So if we made a schematic of flow in the core, it would look like that. It has to be red because it's hot in the core. It's like 5,000 degrees, if not more. But all the motions would have an alignment that's north-south, right? That's going from top to bottom of the page because they're all controlled by the way Earth rotates, just like that big dollop of creamer was controlled. So all those motions are lined up north-south, and they generate magnetic fields that are lined up north-south. Okay, and at 0th order, that is why Earth has a magnetic field that works well with your compass. Okay, any questions?
Thank you so much, Professor, for that amazing experiment and talk. We love this. We already have Julian raising his hand.
Let's go, Julian.
Like the entire talk. Yeah, Julian, do you want to unmute yourself and ask your question, please?
I'm gonna ask you. How does the planet rotate?
Oh, that's an excellent question. So, okay, why does Earth rotate in the first place? Really good question. So, when the solar system formed, it formed from a huge cloud of gas. And at some point, the gas, through its own gravity, pulled in on itself. And it was probably a big, messy glob of gas, but a little bit of it was spinning a little more one way than the other, okay? And as it came in, everything started to spin faster. So it's like this experiment. Let's see if I can do it without hitting anything. If I'm spinning around and all my mass out here, and then I pull in, I'll speed up. Can you get me weights from in there? And so as I pull in that material, as that gas collapses inwards and forms a solar system, that little bit of rotation acts to speed everything up because you have to what's called conserve angular momentum. So then everything starts spinning faster, and that's how the planets, they're simply spinning because the whole original big soup of gas was spinning. So let's see here. Okay, spin me. And now we're gonna, when I pull in, everything speeds up faster. If I pull out, I slow down. Spin me, woo! And now I pull in and I speed up. That's what happens to the cloud of gas that our solar system formed from. And everything within it then starts spinning fast too, like the planets. I hope that answered your question, Julian.
Yeah, thank you. Julian, does that help? Does that answer your question?
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay,
Pleasure.
so we have a lot of questions coming in. What do you think, Professor? Should we do one question from the chat and one question from people raising their hands so that we get
one chat, then next one's a hand-raised question.
Okay, so one question from the chat is, will the magnetic field ever flip? Will it ever flip?
Oh, I hope somebody would ask that. So an amazing thing, another reason we know we don't have a permanent magnet in Earth is periodically the shape of Earth's magnetic field flips. So we go from having a north, it goes from, on that map I showed before, it goes from blue in the north and red in the south to the whole magnetic field flips. It flips in about 5,000 years, and it does so right now every about 250,000 years. And the cool thing is we haven't had a magnetic reversal in about 700,000 years. So we're quote unquote late, but we're late it's kind of like saying we're late to have a thunderstorm. The weather in the core, the processes in the core are turbulent and crazy. So the timing of events are not exactly clockwork. You don't know when these big events are going to occur. You just know they will. So it's like an earthquake in that way too. You don't know when they're coming, but they are coming. And so Earth's magnetic field, interestingly, is a little overdue for reversal. And rather excitingly, the field has dropped in strength by about 10% over the last 300 years. So some people argue we're starting to have one right now. And I've looked at the data, and I personally don't think we are, but some people do think they are. And there's the joy of it. We'll find out when we're very dead in like 5,000 years. It's gonna be great.
I love it. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Does
Yeah.
that answer your question? I don't know what. That was Rohan. Yeah, Rohan.
Good question,
That explanation. Great question. Great question. We have a lot of hand raised. Guys, keep those questions coming. Thank you so much. We had Nahalia. Nahalia had asked really good questions last time. Yeah.
Can I do Elisa Estrada? I see Elisa on my screen.
Yes. Okay, Elisa, please go ahead.
Okay. I was gonna ask if the Earth can ever stop spinning.
Oh, I love that question. Okay, so Elisa asked, can the Earth ever stop spinning? And the answer is, it's never gonna change by a lot, because I did that silly experiment before where I pulled in the weights, and when I pulled space. And so nothing is rubbing on Earth to slow it down. So essentially, it's always going to go at the same rate at zero, as far as we're concerned. Now, you know what's really cool? Is it does slow down though a little. And it slows down a little because the Earth talks to the moon. Their gravity fields interact. And when they talk to each other, the moon moves a little bit away from the Earth. And as it does, it forces Earth to slow down a little. So the moon is slowly slowing down the Earth, but so slowly that we will never notice and will never care. So the Earth will always spin at the rate we're interested in, or that we're living on right now, as far as we're concerned, okay? Maybe in like 3 billion years, it will slow down a bit, but I'll be really, really long gone by then. We will not be interested. Does that make sense? But a great question. I love all these rotation questions.
Thank you.
Oh no, my pleasure.
Thank you so much, Professor. I think we can take a couple more. Do you want to do maybe Gabby or Aiden? I see they're doing a lot of good questions and by raising their hands.
Okay.
Maybe Gabby? How are you, Gabby? Do you want to unmute yourself?
My question was, is the Earth the only one that has a magnetic field, or do other planets have it or not?
Oh, Gabby, I love it. Okay, so for that, I'm going to show you a map. Let's see if I can get back to, I'm going to share screen again. Another exceptionally delightful question. Here is a map of, here are maps of some of the other planets in the solar system. Mercury's top left, Jupiter's kind of here in the middle, Ganymede, which is a moon of Jupiter. It's not quote unquote a planet, it's just a moon, and yet it generates its own magnetic field. Saturn has a huge magnetic field, and these are all what are called dipole magnetic fields, which means most of the magnetic field comes out in the northern hemisphere and goes in the southern hemisphere. So these would all have working compasses. Now, you know what's just, for me, even cooler, is if you, don't worry about that. If you look at Uranus and Neptune, they do not have those kinds of fields. If you had a compass on Uranus, it'd be a mess. It wouldn't point. It would point towards the darkest patch of color on the map of Uranus, right? It goes wherever the magnetic field's strongest. The magnetic field's strongest in like 4 or 5 different spots, and none of them are really near the North or South Pole. So no compass would work on Uranus. Even though it's generating its own field, it's generating a crazy field. And you might say, no, they should always point towards the North Pole. No, there's other physics that we have to figure out. And can I tell you something? I've worked on Uranus and Neptune's magnetic fields for years. We still can't explain that. It's totally delightful. So reversals, which was asked about earlier, and the complex fields of Uranus and Neptune, we really don't understand either of those. Those are open questions for you guys to answer someday, if and when you decide to become planetary scientists.
That is awesome. That is awesome. That's so inspiring because just hearing from Professor's perspective, it's like so exciting, right? How was it, Gabby? Did you enjoy it? Okay, we maybe have time for maybe a couple more questions, Professor.
Let's do it. We got this. Danny, we got this.
Let's do it. Yes. Aiden's been raising his hands for a little while too, and he has his camera open.
Yeah, we have a
Aiden, I gotcha.
Yeah, how's it going, Aiden? Do you want to ask your question here?
Yes.
What you got?
So, how do planets get trapped in the sun's gravity?
Oh, great question. Okay, so this it relates to the question about how does Earth get its spin. So the solar system originally started out as this huge, really rather large ball of gas. And that ball of gas is swirling around, doing this and that. But then its own gravity starts to pull in on it. So the gas has gravitational, the gravity pulls us and keeps us onto Earth. Well, this big cloud of extended gas has its own gravity. And at some point it gravitationally collapses. It starts pulling in. It's like water going down the sink. It all goes towards one spot. And as it does, over 99% of the mass of that cloud of gas gets trapped and forms the sun. And the planets form out of kind of a leftover gaseous disk that surrounds that original star, the sun. And so the planets are forming from the same ball of gas as the sun formed from about 5 billion years ago. And once it forms, well, actually it's super dynamical. There's all this exciting stuff that happens while it forms. But we ended up in the state we're seeing right now with the 8 planets we have and a big sun with all the mass sitting in the middle. So we're tiny little particles out there swinging around this huge sun. The sun is the dog, a really big dog, and we're just little fleas circling around it out in space. Very pleasant fleas, but we're little compared to that big, big sun. Aiden, did that make sense?
Yes, also, is the...
No, we only have like a minute more. Come on, let's keep, I want to get in one more thing.
It's about it.
Thank you so much, Aiden. Hey,
I love the question, Aiden. Let's fit in one other question from one other person, and then I'm out.
Wow, that's so
Yeah. Okay. So you see on Dan's screen, they have two. They're
Yep,
raising
I
their
see
hands.
Dan Ming. Let's get a question, and then I'm gone.
Which you guys?
Next week.
Okay. Let's do Dan.
Okay, go. Will Earth's magnetic force ever stop?
Oh, I love it. That is such a good question. So the question was, will Earth's magnetic forces, will its magnetic field ever go away? And the answer is yes, it will. And that's important because Earth's magnetic field shields us from a lot of what's called space weather. So, will it go away? Eventually it will. And the reason it will is because convection, motion, turbulence in Earth's outer core creates the magnetic field. Excuse me. And as Earth cools off from space, eventually the convection will stop. It'll cool off. It's like a pot on the stove. Heat up a pot on the stove and then look at the fluid inside it. It's always moving around, it's doing this and that. But if you leave it there for a couple of days, it'll stop moving altogether, even for a couple of hours. Well, that's like Earth too. Earth is cooling off to space. And when it eventually becomes cool enough, the mantle will stop moving around and we'll lose our earthquakes, we'll lose plate tectonics. And the core will stop moving around too. It'll stop moving in time because it'll be cold and it'll just sit there. And if the fluid's not moving around, it won't generate a magnetic field. When that happens, we won't have a magnetic field anymore. So we should truly and deeply enjoy this moment in time. It's such a beautiful magnetic field and a rather nice planet.
I so much agree. Thumbs up from Dan. Thank you guys for the question.
Great question.
I just want to say thank you, Professor, for such an entertaining and educational talking experiment.
And you know what? And I managed to break my compass too.
Yeah, I know it's not science until we break stuff.
That's totally science.
So thank you guys.
Thanks everybody.
How do you guys feel about it? Professor, actually, before you leave, would you mind if I ask if you have some website or email, if people have questions?
So if you want to, can I put this to everybody? If you guys want to see some more experiments that we do, you could go to YouTube and you could do, it's YouTube, I'm going to go right here, YouTube, I think it's Spin Lab UCLA. And so you can do all sorts of experiments there. And the other thing you can do is go onto GitHub and look up our website there is called DIY-namics. And there on DIY-namics, we show you how to build the experiments I showed. So you can do your own fluid dynamics experiments on that website. I think those are the best I got.
Thank you. Thank you.
Oh, and there's
Thank you so
Jordyn
much,
coming in with the actual DIY-namics link. I feel better knowing
you.
Jordyn's out there.
Of course. Thank you so much for support, Jordyn. Thank you, guys. Thank you so much, Professor, for an awesome time. Guys, thank you. We have our next speaker too. Thank you so much for the question. Let's keep this up, right? But before, I just want to also remind you guys, even though I love hanging out with you, there's so many booths out there for you to explore and do some experiments yourself. How does that sound, right? We want to also be able to do some science experiments here. So what if I link something here in the chat for all the available booths out here? You can just see. Have you guys explored any, right? If you have, like, what's your favorite one, right? Here, let's link some. On this document, you'll find a lot of booths ranging from elephant toothpaste, ranging from doing experiments like, you know, how random is your randomness. And here, does anyone want gifts? Do you guys like gifts? Maybe like a little broom bear or gifts? Yes? I hear Dan says yes. If you like gifts, I recommend going to check out this specific booth right here. Because by going there, okay, they're gonna offer you a free gift and there's an experiment waiting for you, okay? I'll link this booth just in a bit, but before that, let me please introduce you to our next speaker, okay? How's everyone feeling right now? How's everyone feeling? Good? Are you feeling good right now? Dr. Jessica? Dr. Jessica, are you here?
Yes, I am.
Hi, Professor, how are you?
I'm good, how are you?
I am so grateful that you're here and for spending time with us. Let me first quickly introduce, thank you. Let me first quickly introduce you and introduce the talk, and maybe we'll open the floor for you to have your session. Is that okay?
That's great.
Okay, so Professor Jessica Lee, just make your spotlight as well. You know, the spotlights are fun. Spotlight for everyone. Okay, Professor Jessica Lee is an associate professor at the Department of Statistics, okay, Department of Human Genetics and Department of Biomathematics. She's also a faculty member in the Interdepartmental PhD program in Bioinformatics and a member in Johnson Comprehensive Cancer Center Gene Regulation Research Program area, okay? Prior to joining UCLA, Professor Jessica obtained her PhD from the Interdepartmental Group in Biostatistics at University of California, Berkeley. She received her BS from Department of Biological Science and Technology at Tsinghua University, China, which is a prestigious university in China, okay? Thank you, Professor, for spending time with us. Let me just first quickly share a slide that has more information for everyone to see. Oops. So, slide speaker room. Here's Professor right here. And in this talk, okay, Professor Jessica Lee is going to talk about how she uses statistics to quantify the central dogma of biology, which is from DNA to RNA and RNA to protein, right? Protein. We learned about protein an hour ago, and now we're thinking about how we get proteins now, okay? So, Professor, please, the floor is all yours. At the end, maybe if we have some time, you guys feel free to ask some questions and we can ask Professor. Okay, thank you, Professor.
Thank you very much for the introduction, Danny. So can you see my screen well?
Yeah, we can see your screen.
Okay, thanks. And so it's my pleasure to introduce my research, one of my research topics to our kids, right? The audience here. So the question is actually in the middle of statistics and biology. So central dogma is known to be a fundamental principle of molecular biology, which I will introduce very soon. So First of all, for our audience, I want to introduce what is statistics. So many people hear this term, but it's often confusing. So I think the term has evolved a lot in the past century, or actually more than a century. Its foundation was a discipline or a branch of mathematics called the probability theory, which was developed in the 16th to 17th century. And it's a branch of mathematics concerned with probability, and it serves as the foundation for statistics. So for example, if we want to study probability theory, we'll do a lot of math derivations as shown here in this figure. So it's math. And then later, statistics was developed as a new discipline, stemmed from the probability theory. So we say that it's an application of probability theory, and it studies nature of data and also of the theory of data analysis. So for example, the most famous topic in statistics is linear regression. So let's say that those dots represent our measure values of two variables in those two axes. And the question is to find a relationship between the two variables. This is what we call regression. So in mathematical statistics, which started almost a century ago, we still use a lot of math to solve the problems. And a lot of the solutions were derived by hands. Now, moving into this 21st century, we call this computer age of statistics, because we now have the powerful computers to help us do the data analysis. So seeing that this word cloud from Google Images, you will see that data collection, data organization, and some descriptive analysis have become more and more important, not just mathematics. So now the statistics field is considered to be the core of what we call data science, which is about how we analyze data to extract scientific knowledge from data. So I think our field is broadening, and we will need more and more bright young minds to join us in this adventure. Okay, so that's about statistics. And about my own research, my group is titled The Junction of Statistics and Biology. So we deal with biomedical data analysis. So in my field, you see this trendy word, next generation sequencing and precision medicine are becoming more and more popular. And both will generate large data sets that require analysis. So many of the data sets are new, and we cannot directly apply existing methods to them directly. So we have to develop new methods specifically for those new data types. So this is my team. So I think this is an old picture, but we are having new members joining us to do research together. And we took this picture in the lounge of our stats department. So one quote I want to give our audience today is that, why do we want to study statistics? The best thing about it is that we get to play in everyone's backyard. That means statistics can be connected to many fields, because many fields generate data. And as long as you generate data, we need to analyze data, and then we need statistics. This was a quote from a famous statistician, John Tukey. So I think it still applies nowadays. So back to the title of my talk, the central dogma. What does it say? It is the most fundamental principles of modern biological sciences. So in our cell, the genetic material is called the DNA. But how does this material determine the shape and the function of cells? So it goes through this process called the central dogma. First, the DNA will be transcribed, and this process called transcription, into messenger RNAs. And messenger RNAs will then be translated, this process called translation, into proteins. And of course, besides transcription translation, there will also be degradation processes. So mRNA will be degraded as well as protein. So what we have as the number of proteins of each type in our cells will be a combined result of the central dogma. So we know proteins are the workers that play the roles in our cells, right? So DNA stores the information, but what execute the roles are proteins. So then a fundamental question is, how can we know which steps contribute more to the protein levels we observe in cells? So I want to say that the central dogma was developed more than 50 years ago, but it was until now that we are able to study this process quantitatively thanks to the development of technologies. So basically, that's what we call high throughput experiments. So we want to be able to measure how many mRNAs are generated for thousands of genes in our genome. So gene is a unit of our genome. So a gene in the DNA, which is a region in the genome, will become a protein in most cases. And those are the genes we are interested in. So therefore, we want to be able to measure those genes levels at mRNA level as well as their expression levels at the protein level so that we can determine, does transcription contribute more or does translation contribute more to the protein levels we have in cells? So for measuring gene expression at the mRNA level, we have technologies including microarray and next generation sequencing. So microarray was developed in the 1990s, while next generation sequencing was developed around 2005. So both technologies are still being used because they have different advantages in terms of accuracy and costs. So at the protein level, the current technology is called mass spectrometry, which allows us to measure thousands of genes expression levels in protein. And finally, for those degradation steps, we can use pulse labeling to measure how fast mRNAs and proteins degrade. So this project I started working on was from my PhD study in 2011. At that time, there was a Nature paper published. This is a top journal in science, right? So Nature had this paper that measured thousands of genes, mRNA levels, and protein levels, and degradation speeds in mice. So with this is the first availability of such massive data on a global scale. So the conclusion from this paper is actually was very shocking because it says, RNA levels do not well predict protein levels. So in other words, even if we can measure RNA levels, it doesn't mean we know what protein levels could be. This challenged a lot of existing studies in biology. The reason is that our techniques are far more advanced for measuring RNAs than proteins. Therefore, a lot of conclusions were based on RNA levels instead of protein levels. But if this conclusion holds, then those old results based on RNA levels would become problematic. So my collaborator at Berkeley, Dr. Biggin, became interested in this question. We wanted to check whether the analysis in that Nature paper was reproducible and solid. And this was also motivated by a very famous paper published in 2005 that questioned the validity of published research. So it means that even though a lot of findings were published, they should still be checked by third-party researchers again to really verify their validity. So motivated by this, we actually used our statistical expertise to reanalyze the data. And we found two issues that were ignored in the original study. The first is that the original authors treated the data as 100% accurate without considering the uncertainty in those measurements. And that uncertainty is the focus of study in statistics. So by modeling that possibility of uncertainty, especially the mass spectrometry data for measuring protein levels is known to be very noisy. So after accounting for measurement uncertainty, we found the result that it is not certain to conclude that translation dominates over transcription. Instead, we think transcription still plays a very big role. Okay, and we also developed another model based on their data, so using an orthogonal perspective. So this time, we basically used translation rates that are measured by other related studies instead of the translation rates which were inferred in this study, in this original study, because basically they do not have direct measurements, but just some inferred values. So replacing the values by measurements, then we found that the contribution of transcription can be even bigger. So this raises a question about the conclusion about the original study. At least we think it was too early to confirm, the translation just dominates. It could be case by case. And so therefore, it was also too early to claim that previous results based on RNA level data were not trustworthy. So I think this is a very interesting example to show that we can use statistics to challenge existing findings and offer our new insights. And because of the importance of this topic, our results were included in this book written by Burke is a UCLA professor in this molecular cell biology textbook, which was used by undergraduate students. Okay, so I want to say that the debate is still ongoing. So you will see work supporting the more important role of transcription and work supporting the more important role of translation. So our current understanding is that it's context specific. So we believe that if the biological system or like the cell state is stable, then transcription plays the dominant role. But if the cell is undergoing some rapid changes, such as immune responses, then translation may get into play and play a bigger role, and just to make the cell change faster. So after that, we continue the study in more species, like this is yeast, this is a plant, this is fruit fly, this is mice, this is human. We wanted to see whether we can find some interesting conserved mechanisms about how translation is controlled across those species. Okay, that's my first example. And the second example, which I also find quite interesting, is a topic which is still of crucial importance nowadays, but this was studied by my PhD advisor at Berkeley back in 1975. So it's about the admission gender bias in UC Berkeley about PhD programs. So if we look at the admission rate for men and women at that time, we see that the admission rate for women was much lower, right? So this raised the question about the existence of gender bias. So that's why my advisor at that time, who was a young assistant professor in the stats department, was invited to join a team to investigate this. And interestingly, they found that if they decompose the applicants and admitted applicants by departments, they found that, at least among the 6 departments here, 4 departments gave women a higher admission rate. So this seems to be counterintuitive, right? Why do we have different conclusions by looking at the overall data instead of the by department data? What drove this difference? So if we look at the table carefully, you can see that even though in those departments A, B, D, and F, women did have a higher acceptance rate, but their numbers of applicants were actually very small, right? So the majority of women were applied to Department C, and E. So C, D, E, F overall has more people than those 2 departments. And also, if you look at the admission rate or the chance of admission, you can see that the numbers are lower in department C, D, E, and F than A and B. So basically what this suggests is that even though by department, women didn't seem to have a disadvantage, but because more women apply to those more difficult departments whose acceptance rate was low, therefore their overall admission rate was lower. So that was the basic conclusion from this paper. And in statistics, this is a very interesting phenomenon called the Simpson's paradox, which means that the conclusion you draw from the overall data can be different from the conclusion if you stratify your data into categories and examine each category separately. So I think this is something statistics, which makes statistics very interesting, one aspect of that. So it shows that analyzing data carefully may give you different conclusions. Yeah, Simpson's paradox. So finally, I want to say that in my research group, our goal is to really find a junction between what we have in theory for statistics as well as the real problems. So we want to be able to apply those nice theory to important problems, in particular in biomedical sciences, so that we can find powerful solutions to those problems. So finally, I want to echo this interesting quote from Turkey again. The best thing about being a statistician is that you get to play in everyone's backyard. So I hope that our audience here can find this topic interesting and possibly consider statistics as your future major. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Professor. I love the quote at the end too, and it's so special to see how statistics evolve over time and now into a greater future. Thank you for charting that future for us and explaining how everything is in statistics. What do you guys think? How do you guys think of that talk? You know, thank you so much.
Thank you.
So we do have some questions in the chat. But before that, I just want to also tell the audience a little bit too, because I'm also in the stats department. If you're interested in more statistics, there's a booth by UCLA Statistics, which I sent a link to. Okay, feel free to check it out. They're gonna give you gifts if you participate in their experiments. I think it's worthwhile to, if you're interested in statistics, to get to know more about how it works. Okay, so we have a question here from Deborah about our COVID vaccine and how it's mRNA.
Right, it is the same mRNA I was talking about. Yeah, it's the molecule. M stands for messenger. Messenger means that RNA is an intermediate messenger that transfers information from DNA to protein. So what we have in the COVID vaccine were we call that exogenous mRNA, which means that these were not produced in our body, but in the labs, right? So they injected those mRNAs into our body. So then these mRNAs will become proteins through the process as a translation. Then those proteins will actually basically those proteins produced by the COVID-19 mRNAs will be something to stimulate our immune response so that our system can generate antibodies again to fight against the COVID-19, the virus, SARS-CoV-2 virus.
Wow. Yeah. Okay, thank you. That's very detailed. Thank you for explaining. Okay, Deborah says, thank you for explaining.
Yeah, so that's why I think so before COVID-19, I was working with my collaborator on how we can predict the translation rate or the speed that each mRNA can be translated into protein. So we're looking for what features does this mRNA have to determine its translation rate. But now with the COVID-19 vaccine development, I think our research become more relevant because we want to have the vaccine, the mRNAs in the vaccine to be more effective so that a smaller amount of mRNA can give us a large amount of that beneficial proteins. Then that can help us fight the virus.
Wow. I think it's so cool that, Professor, it's like you said, like how statistics connects with so many other aspects.
Yeah.
Would you say that how did you first get into the junction between biology and statistics?
Yeah, I think,
right?
That's I think my journey was quite interesting. I was fascinated by science when I was very little, and my parents were both majored in mathematics, and they were high school mathematics teachers when I was young. And so I think I like mathematics as well as science. So when I was thinking about my major for my college, and my parents told me, probably mathematics is already a very well developed discipline, but biology is still much underdeveloped. So a lot of questions remain open. So I feel like, I wanted to do, if I want to do something related to science, biology is a very rich, a very rich mind, which hasn't been really explored. So that's why I chose to study biology in my undergrad major. But quickly, I realized that biology was still primarily experimental discipline, that people focused a lot on data generation. But at that time, microarray were already fully developed. So I can see that large data sets can be generated. So I realized that, since I like math, I think math skills would be needed by biologists in some day, just like physics and chemistry, which were first started as experimental observational studies, but quickly they need math to formalize their hypothesis and theory. So that's the way I see biology to go. So that's why I decided that I would need more quantitative skills to do the research I want. So that's why I chose to study statistics for my PhD. And then I came to UCLA, and my research is now at the intersection.
That's amazing. Yeah, it's like a process, like a natural process from science as you get interested and as you find more need, grab onto more knowledge which interconnects with each other.
I think the passion is the biggest driver.
Thank you so much for the talk, Professor Lee, and for your passion on the topic. I really appreciate it. Yes. So let's see. Do we have any concerns or any thoughts, comments for our talk? We still have a couple more minutes. We just want to give everyone a chance to also voice your opinion before we move on, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I think we're good. Okay, well, thank you, Professor, so much.
Thank you, Danny.
Guys. Please just, if you really appreciate the talk, let's type thank you to Professor in the chat, okay? And we appreciate her for spending her time today. Thank you, guys. Thank you, Professor. Have a good rest of your day.
introduction. Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Nikki. I'll be the moderator. I'm introducing Jordyn. Jordyn is an oceanographer who uses math and computer models to understand ocean currents and how they interact with ocean biology. So she is a 6th-year PhD student in the AOS, or Atmospheric and Oceanic Sciences Department here at UCLA. She works with professors Daniele Bianchi, Andrew Stewart, and Jim McWilliams. And her research is centered on understanding the impacts of dynamical ocean processes on geochemistry, ecology, and the food web structure. So today she's going to be showing us the not so great Pacific garbage patch, and she's going to use a rotating tank to show us. So take it away, Jordyn.
Okay, thanks, Nikki. Let me set up my screen share.
Recording in progress.
Great. So thanks again, Nikki. Hello, everybody. My name is Jordyn, and today I'm going to be talking about the ultimate fate of trash in the ocean, and specifically the trash in the Pacific Ocean, which we've been seen to aggregate in these large areas, which we call garbage patches. So who here has heard of the garbage patch before? Anybody? Yeah, so it's gotten really, really big recently, and now we learn about it in school. The Pacific garbage patch sits in between the continental US, which is here, and then the islands of Hawaii. And it's been important to oceanographers and other people who care about marine life for several decades. But before we get into actually all of those processes and I show you an experiment, I want to tell you a little bit more about what I do as an oceanographer and then what oceanographers do more generally. Okay, so I consider myself a biophysical oceanographer, and that just means that I think about how the physical movement of the ocean affects different aspects of marine life. And specifically, I'm interested about the water near the US West Coast, and that spans all the way from Baja California up to Oregon and Washington. And this is called the California Current System. And it's actually where a large amount of the ocean's fish come from. So the state of the ocean, so how the currents move around, all of the chemistry and the physics and the biology is really important to determine how much fish we get out of the coastal ocean and how healthy those fish are. And so myself and other scientists who care about this area really care about the Pacific garbage patch because all of the garbage and plastic in the ocean really interferes with marine life. And so over the last few decades, marine garbage patches have gotten a ton of attention, especially because of this interaction between marine life and humans. But in order to clean them up and prevent them from getting bigger, scientists really want to understand how they form. And so today we'll be talking about how these garbage patches form and different ways oceanographers study them. So first, what I'm going to do is talk about the different ways that oceanographers study the ocean. So some oceanographers go on research cruises. These are really, really large ships. You can think of them as floating science laboratories. This is a boat that NOAA has. It's the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. And scientists go out in the middle of the ocean and they take measurements and then they evaluate their findings on these boats. These are anywhere from a few weeks to a few months long. I've never been out on one, but I know a lot of people really, really enjoy this work. Some oceanographers also use satellites, so we can actually see things in the ocean from space. And we can measure things like how fast the currents are moving, and we can even see things like photosynthesis on the surface of the ocean from algae from space. And so I think that's pretty incredible and really neat. So we've gotten really, really good data from all of that. Some oceanographers use ocean models, and you can think of these as big simulations of ocean physics that can be run on really powerful supercomputers. And finally, some oceanographers use laboratory experiments designed to test some of the behavior that we expect to see in the ocean in a more controlled setting, so like at the human scale. So today we're going to look at a combination of both laboratory experiments and ocean models to understand how the garbage patch was formed in the ocean. Okay, so then we can ask the question, what is a garbage patch? So a garbage patch is exactly what it sounds like. It's a huge pile of human-made debris and trash in the ocean. It was discovered a little under 35 years ago in the North Pacific Ocean. And some of the plastic that's been floating in the patch is estimated to be over 50 years old. So this thing has been around for a really, really long time. We're not exactly sure how large the center of the garbage patch is, but some estimates say that it's approximately the size of Texas. Although you can kind of tell here it's a little bit bigger than Texas, but people like to think about where it's mostly densely concentrated. So that means if you were able to put a car on the edge of the garbage patch and drive across, it would take you 12 hours going at about highway speed. So this thing is really, really big. Some estimates of weight of the amount of trash in the ocean is something like 6.3 billion tons, which is a crazy number, and I have no idea how to explain that other than to say it's about 1,000 times more than all the weight of all of the blue whales in the ocean alive today. So this thing is huge, it is incredibly unruly, and we expect that by 2050, the trash in the ocean will weigh more than all of the fish combined. So why is this thing important? Well, for plastic in the ocean especially, we estimate that things will take over 450 years to degrade or decompose, and for some things never. So it's important that we think about how the trash got in the ocean now and how we get rid of it. Okay, there are at least 5 garbage patches, each of them shown here in the major circulations in all of the global oceans. We have 2 in the Pacific, 2 in the Atlantic, and 1 in the Indian Ocean. Although scientists kind of estimate there's a bunch of other smaller patches around the ocean, these are just the main ones. We think a lot of the time about the Great Pacific garbage patch because it is the largest and has the most trash in it. So now that we kind of know where everything is, we can ask ourselves the question, how exactly do these garbage patches form? This question is a little bit complex, but we're going to use both use laboratory experiments and models to sort of see how that happens in real time. Okay, so how do garbage patches form? They are at the center of the large basins, and surprisingly enough, the winds from the atmosphere are the main reason that we get these large vortexes in the ocean. A combination of really complex physics happen, but effectively we can say that the atmospheric winds, which I have here in yellow, and you can think of these green little areas as like the land, they spin the gyre, or they spin the ocean in the same direction of the winds. So these gyres are indeed large patches of spinning water that go across all the way from the west coast of the US, all the way to the east coast of Asia and Russia. So this is huge circulation that goes in a big circle. So now we have this spinning vortex of water. In the Pacific, we think that all of the trash that ends up in the middle of this comes from both North America, Central America, as well as Asia and Russia. So if trash is coming from all sides, how exactly does it get caught in the middle? Well, the answer to that has to do with the fact that the oceans sit on the surface of the Earth, and the Earth itself is spinning. So a couple talks ago, Professor John Aurnou was talking about how the Earth was spinning. And so actually, not only is that important for the core of the Earth, it's also important for everything that sits on top of it. And so because this gyre is so large, the spinning of the planet actually matters in the behavior of the water, and the rotation of the Earth affects the water at the surface. Okay, so not only does it make it spin in the same direction as the winds, what happens is that at the very, very surface, water is pushed inward. So it's both spinning in the direction of the wind and going into the interior. So that's why all the trash that comes out of the land ends up in the middle of the Pacific. Okay, so now that we kind of know how this works, let's do an experiment to see this in action and see how our trash ends up in the middle. Okay, so today what we're going to be doing is using a rotating tank. This was built by some people in the EPSS department, including people from the Spin Lab, which is John Aurnou's lab. Rotating tanks are a great way to simulate flow on planets, and we can take these huge flows and represent them at human scale. Okay, so we'll start with going over all the material that we need and how to represent this. So we have the AOS rotating tank. Here I am with it at a previous EYU. I have 2 clip fans. These represent the atmospheric flow. I've got some paper dots, which are going to be my surface trash, and I've got some food coloring so that you can see what the inside of the flow looks like. And then I have some pipettes so I can put some dots or some of the food coloring in the water. Okay, so now on to our experiment, the fun part. So to start this off, I've already put some dye in the tank, and I'm going to just start this now. And so I'll start by putting some paper dots at the surface. Again, we can think of this as trash. I've got my winds going. Note that this isn't kind of in the opposite direction, but it's still the same thing. If the winds are blowing in this direction, the water is going to also go in the same direction. And so here what you can see is that even the trash that started out on the outside of the tank is starting to move inward. Oh no, it's starting to move inward. And you can see that with the dye too. So the dye is moving around in circles, following the same direction. And we can see that everything on the outside is moving toward the inside. And so that's pretty cool. I mean, not ultimately cool, but this is the same thing that happens in the big basins of the ocean. And so any sort of trash that ends up, I've sped up the video a little bit here so it goes faster. But what you can see is that basically anything on the outside of the tank keeps moving inward and inward and inward. And ultimately, everything is going to end up in the very, very center if we run this long enough. So I'll just do that one more time. So yeah, so here is our rotating tank again. All of this trash. Yeah. Okay. So not only can we use experiments like these to understand what's happening in the ocean, oceanographers also use really powerful computers to simulate the global ocean. And I wanted to show an example of that as well. Okay. So here what I'm doing is showing you a simulation of the fate of the trash in the ocean. And these were created by scientists at NASA. And it's run on a very powerful computer. All the dots at the surface are buoyant particles, meaning that they're lighter than water, so they stay at the surface. And you can think about them as little pieces of plastic floating around. So all of the atmospheric circulation and the flow is calculated using a combination of both the atmospheric state and the oceanic state. This is kind of like what I think about on a regular basis and what I do. So I build experiments that look like this. And so we talked about how the winds sort of drive these flows. And what you can see here is that there's some really, really strong and bright areas where all of these particles or all the trash ends up aggregating, right? And this is the same thing that's occurring here. Because the winds are so large and the Earth is rotating, it's actually pushing everything to the very, very center of these gyres. The other thing that you can see here is that there's really 5 distinct gyres. So we have one in the North Pacific, we have one in the South, one in the North Atlantic, one in the South Atlantic, and then one in the Indian Ocean. The other thing to point out here is that these go all the way from the west, basically the west coast of the US, all the way over to the South China Sea, which is in between Japan and the Philippines. And so this thing is really, really large, and it's really hard to estimate exactly how much trash is between this region. Okay, so now that we've looked at an experiment and a computer simulation, let's talk a little bit about what we can do to help clean up ocean trash and prevent it from happening again. Okay, so one group that's thinking about this is the Ocean Cleanup, which is a nonprofit agency out of the Netherlands, and it's proposed to remove the large pieces of trash out of the ocean. And they've done 2 missions now. This is what their setup looks like. They have like a net like this that catches all the trash in the ocean, and then they have a tanker that comes in and takes all the trash out. They're one of the most successful groups so far. There are other concerns that have to do with removing trash in the ocean, and these are things like microplastics, which require a lot more effort to clean up. And microplastics basically are just these tiny, tiny, tiny pieces of plastic, smaller than like the smallest Legos that you could possibly get. And so not only is the cleanup of physical trash in the ocean super important, but what we do here as coastal locals is also really, really important. So what can you do being here in California or wherever you're joining us from? You can learn. You learn how your decisions and actions can impact the ocean. And these can be things about like how littering or leaving something behind when you go visit, say, the beach or the park is really, really important. Anything you leave in those areas often ends up in the ocean, especially if you live near the coast. You can also learn about what type of fish to eat too, so things can be more sustainable. You can educate people, and you can help others learn how to make good decisions on their own. You can tell your friends like, hey, let's maybe not leave something behind. And finally, you can vote. But if you're not old enough yet, talk to an adult that you really care about. Policies are the most important way that we can mitigate how we treat our ocean trash, water processing, protect our oceans, and all of that. And if you'd like to volunteer, there are 2 really great nonprofits that do beach cleanups in Santa Monica Bay, if you're an LA local. They are Heal the Bay and Surfrider Foundation, and they have California's Coastal Cleanup Day, which is in September, so that just passed. And with that, I will just say thank you and take any questions. And I'll put up a fun video. This is a really awesome, this is a really awesome computer model of the ocean, assuming that it loads. Yes. maybe. Okay, yeah, so I'm gonna put this up. But this is just a bunch of, this is a computer simulation tracking all of the flow in the ocean. So a little bit higher detail. Oh, it's not working.
So it looks like we have someone asking a question, Sienna and Aria. If you want to go ahead and unmute yourself.
Okay. Oh, we're unmuted, Aria. Go ahead. Your question first, Aria. Oh. I have a question while they're figuring out what their question is. Is there, do you find that there's any impact of climate change on this great, not so great garbage patch?
Yeah, exactly. That's a really great question. So there is actually a really big impact of climate change. It is in just humans themselves. So climate change, we understand it to be caused by humans. The more humans end up doing things to the earth, the more we end up seeing signals of this. And because there's more humans around, we actually have seen a lot more trash. And we're gotten to this point now where our landfills are becoming pretty much unmanageable because of how much wasteful things that we have.
Girls, listen, this is important.
They're looking at you, girls.
Yeah, and how much wasteful things that we have. The other thing too is that we've also noticed that all of the wind in the wind over the ocean has gotten much stronger over the past couple of years. So not only are we seeing a much faster circulation, we're also seeing stronger convergence. So we're seeing more and more pile up in these really dense areas. And in some places, you actually see like animals that can walk along the surface and things like that, and animals ingesting stuff. So it's really quite incredible. All of this is going on, yeah.
Can she ask another question? Do we have time for a second question from Aria? From us over here?
Is that okay, Nikki?
Oh yeah, go ahead.
Well, about how many animals are killed every year from this?
Oh my gosh. Okay. So there's actually quite a lot. I don't know the exact number, but the thing that we've been seeing a lot now is that animals will actually go up and they will eat all of the trash. And they're not able to digest it, so it sits in their stomach and it just stays there. And because it just stays there, they're not able to eat other things and ingest nutrients that help them survive. So even though they've eaten stuff, they end up basically just dying because their stomach can't handle anymore. But yeah, it's quite substantial. We actually see a lot of, and something that's kind of sad that we see now is that a lot of the food that we get and a lot of fish that we pull out of the ocean actually has a bunch of microplastics all in it. And so that's the other thing too. So it's kind of gross. So we have to really think about, how we approach this problem and how we clean up everything. Right, a good question.
We have a question in the chat. How does climate change make winds go faster?
Oh, that's a super great question. So climate change is making winds go faster because the atmosphere is heating up. You can think about this as, so the atmosphere is heating up. So you can also think about this as a difference in heating between the land and the ocean. So the ocean is really much colder when compared to the land. The hotter that the atmosphere gets, generally the hotter that the land gets. But the atmosphere over the ocean is getting hotter as well. But because the ocean is so large and is able to take up so much heat, it doesn't heat up at the same speed. And that big difference between a really hot land and a really cold ocean makes the wind blow much faster. Does that make sense? Hopefully I made. Oh yes, there's a great conversation going on about Heal the Bay and Surfrider Foundation. They do really incredible stuff they do much more than beach cleanup. They also go and advocate for policies to happen. They talk to coastal managers. They, sort of bridge the gap between science and policy. And so what their work is really important.
I
I'd like to make a comment.
Sure, go for it.
Yeah, if anyone needs it again, I can drop it in the chat, but I dropped the links to the website for Heal the Bay and Surfrider. I volunteer as much as I can. They do a lot of great work. I'm really fortunate to be in a part of LA where it's not a hardship for me to go out and help. But what my neighborhood and my community does is we pick up trash. So there are people who, so basically there's like, you know, when you're driving down a street and then there's like that large island that the government will put, and it sometimes has grass that grows on it and sometimes not. Well, we kind of separate out the neighborhood where someone will take care of the island. Another person walks up and down certain blocks, and we have like the little shopping carts that you can kind of put your laundry in that you get from Target or something. And we just literally just pick up the trash that's left in the streets from people that eat at fast food restaurants and find it okay to leave it in the street or on someone's lawn or throw it out the car. And that's one way we help it to not go into the gutter and into the storm drains and ends up in the ocean. So we just pick up other people's trash. So that's a great thing you can do. Like, everyone has a neighborhood watch, probably, I'm thinking. You can, a great thing I think we could all do is designate someone on your block, like vote them in and say which neighbor wants to be like the leader. And then we just go out so many blocks and do this patch. And if everyone did like 4 or 5 blocks for every patch in every neighborhood, it would help the ocean so much, because then when it rains, it won't go down the drains in like the storm drains, or when the wind blows or whatever makes it go down there, it'll help to stop that reaching the ocean.
Thank you, Natalia.
Thank you.
So Casey, to answer your question, Natalia just really touched on a lot of that. The most important thing that you can do just as an individual is make sure that, you know, all of your trash goes in the right places. If you see anything around you, it's always good to pick stuff up. Of course, be careful with it, wear gloves and don't pick up things that are that you shouldn't be. But, you know, you can volunteer to do neighborhood cleanups and things like that. But yeah, that's a good.
Jordyn, I love you. Yes, so safety first. So I forgot to mention, yes. So we won't even use like the cheapy, you know, like food prep gloves or doctor surgical gloves. We'll use like the dishwashing heavy rubber gloves, or get something like a wire coat hanger and unwrap it so we could poke it and then just like pick it up. So yeah, you want to be careful what you're picking up. Some things you shouldn't, because it could be very dangerous. But for the most part, you know, McDonald's containers and things like that, you can just use gloves.
Yeah, exactly. And so something that we've also been doing recently is trying to think of ways to protect storm drains from getting more trash put in them. So that you see a lot of times, you see a lot of grates on storm drains and things like that. As the Ocean Cleanup Project also has been building these like coastal safety nets that they put at the end of outflows for like large rivers that go out to the ocean. And so that's something that's also really important. Yeah, so they've been putting like these like nets that catch all of the trash as well too. So that stuff's really important. Cool. Yes, painted on sidewalks with dolphin that say no dumping. Absolutely, all of these things. We have more questions? I'm gonna stop sharing. Oh, I'm going to put more links to all of the things in the chat as well. I want to reshare this link to DIY-namics. And so again, DIY-namics is a group that is focused on building affordable experiments for K-12 classrooms and undergrad classrooms alike. And what these do is they simulate phenomenon that we see in planetary flows in both the atmosphere and the ocean, or like John's talk earlier, in planetary interiors. And so you can actually take Legos and build a tank like the one I showed you today. So that's pretty neat. I would definitely recommend checking that out. And then I have, again, links to YouTube channels for both myself and then the Spin Lab if you want to see more rotating tank experiments.
I think we have time for one or two more questions. So if anyone else would like to ask Jordyn something, now's your time.
Jordyn, is there anything we could do to turn off garbage patchification? What could we do?
I mean, the big one is stopping trash from going out, but the garbage patchification, the aggregation is set by the atmospheric flow. So once trash ends up in the water, that's it. It's going to end up right in one of those spots. So unfortunately, not a whole lot we can do once things go into the ocean itself.
There's a question here that asks, does UCLA Oceanography have a YouTube channel that advocates for this and climate change?
Oh, that is a great question. We don't have a specific YouTube channel that does that, but I will put a link into the chat of the Institute for the Environment and Sustainability at UCLA, and they do a lot of advocacy for climate mitigation strategies that we can implement and use in all of like our day-to-day lives, or even like reach out to people who make decisions on a broader scale.
Can I ask one more? Yeah. So then, if all we can do is get rid of the garbage, do we scoop it out, or should these kids eventually be turning into plastic scientists who build plastic-eating microbes?
Oh my God.
How do we do it? How do they do it? We haven't solved it. How do they solve it?
Okay, so yeah, there's a bunch of different ways to approach that. So right now, honestly, like, because we don't really know what plastic-eating microbes will do to the rest of the environmental food chain, dumping a bunch of like plastic-eating microbes might actually do things that are so much worse than having plastic in the ocean. We just don't know what's going to happen. And so if you mess with the food chain at all, you mess with a lot of people's sustainability. So especially in developing countries that rely on seafood for like their main source of macronutrients, that would be a really scary thing if we disrupted that. So the best thing that we have right now is to actually just go out and physically remove all of the trash in the ocean and prevent it from happening, of course.
Love it. That was a great question. But then I was thinking also, it's like those things, you have a mouse, so you introduce a cat, but then the cat does this and you introduce the dog, and then all of a sudden you have like all these compounding things. But it would be so cool if no fish and nothing could be interrupted, and then like these little, like, I don't know, mini things like in the sci-fi movies like Stargate, they just go out there and only eat plastic.
Yeah, that'd be great. The main thing, though, that we're concerned about with stuff like that is that once things die, they start sinking, and then you start getting a ton of oxygen consumption, and so you have these like dead zones in the ocean where nothing can live. And on that note, the breakout rooms are closing, so I want to thank everybody for being here, and this was so much fun. Thank you all for your questions and everything.
Thank you. That was so great. Keep up the good work.
Bye. Thank you.
Recording
Bye.
Stopped. Recording in progress.
So I'm going to introduce Sarah Chase first, and then she's going to give her talk. So Sarah Chase is currently a computational plasma physics PhD student at UCLA. She interned as a graduate student researcher for Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory and worked for UCLA Particle and Cell and Kinetics Simulation Software Center. She also interned as a software engineering intern at Google. So during her talk, Gravity and Structure of the Universe, Sarah will explain principles of gravity and the way it leads to structures in the universe. So that is the introduction, and Sarah, you can take it away.
Can I share my screen?
Oh, yes, please. You should be able to share screen right away.
Okay, great. Give me a moment. Sorry. Okay, do you see astronaut surfing and the word gravity?
Yes, we do.
Cool, thanks everyone. So welcome to the gravity talk. I'm Sarah and I'm going to teach you a little bit about how gravity is affecting our lives. What I'm showing here on the top right is space-time. And maybe you've heard the phrase, gravity warps space-time. So what does that mean? It's just commenting on how gravity can have basically huge effects on everything around us, even space and time. And maybe you've heard of gravitational waves in the news in the last few years. That's why this astronaut over here has a surfboard, because they are surfing some gravitational waves. First, let me introduce myself. I'm a physics graduate student at UCLA. This is what I look like most of the time, sitting on my laptop. All I do as a graduate student is run simulations. I don't touch any experiments. I'm what's called a computationalist. So I'm just always just typing on my laptop, doing math, and trying to figure things out. And on the bottom right, I'm showing you a little bit about my research. So this is a picture of inertial confinement fusion. And all those blue lines coming in are lasers, and they're hitting the walls of this capsule, which will then radiate onto a target and hopefully achieve fusion. So that's what I study in my actual work and writing my dissertation. And then on the bottom left, this is what I look like on a roller coaster being attacked by dinosaurs. So what is gravity? Let's all think to ourselves, how would you define gravity? And how do you think gravity is affecting you right now, your whole life? How is it affecting everything around you? Maybe you've heard of Isaac Newton and the story of an apple falling on his head, and then he invented gravity because he realized that apples fell out of trees because they were attracted to the earth. Maybe you've heard of Albert Einstein, who expanded on Newton's ideas to come up with general relativity and the way that gravity warps space-time. So both of these people were really influential in our modern theories of gravity. But a lot of other people were involved too, because gravity is a really awesome topic that tons of scientists want to study. And if you want to study it, there's so much more work to be done. So join the team. Science is for everyone. So let's define gravity. Gravity is a force that pushes matter together. Matter means anything that has mass. So I have mass, my cell phone has mass, this table has mass. The earth is a huge, massive object, so we'll talk about that. But between any two objects with mass, say me and my cell phone, we're literally attracted to each other because the mass of my cell phone is pulling me and my mass towards it, and then my mass is pulling my cell phone towards me. And that is the force of gravity happening between any two objects with mass. But in our daily lives, the biggest object we have near us is the earth. So gravity makes things fall to earth. So Isaac Newton was thinking about a single apple falling straight down, which sounds kind of different than what I described between me and my phone. But it's actually the same force because the earth is just so big that on our small scale, it looks like everything's falling straight down. But if we zoom out and we can picture the whole earth, everything is falling towards the center of the earth. Wherever you are on the earth, if you jump, you'll be pulled back down towards the center of the earth. So here in this picture, you see some leaves falling, happy fall. everything's falling to the earth because the earth is so much more massive than me, and the force of gravity between me and the earth is so much stronger than the force of gravity between me and my cell phone, for example. But gravity also holds satellites in orbit and holds onto the atmosphere. So satellites, you might not think they're falling down, they're just orbiting around the earth, but actually they're constantly falling, we could say, and then they always are moving forward with some velocity. So as they fall, they do kind of like a not straight path. And by the time they fall down, they've missed the earth, and then they keep looping around. So satellites are constantly falling, but it ends up with them orbiting the earth because they're farther away than we are from the center, and because they have velocity in the forward direction. Gravity is also holding on to the atmosphere. So all the air particles around you, gravity is not completely pulling them all down to the ground, then we wouldn't have any air to breathe. But gravity is holding the atmosphere inside a certain shell. And that's why when a spaceship leaves the earth, it has to go through the atmosphere, but then it breaks free. And there's a layer beyond which there's no more air particles, because all those particles are held onto the earth by the earth's gravity. And there's other forces involved too. But we should be so grateful for gravity, because that's how we can breathe, and that's how we got life on earth, all because we had the atmosphere. And gravity even affects the motion of stars. Stars are giant, massive objects. So of course, two stars have tons of gravity between them. And there's also something called black holes, which are massive bodies. They have lots and lots of mass, especially compared to a star. So in this picture, the white star shape at the center is actually the black hole at the center of our galaxy. And all these little dots happen to be stars moving around that black hole. And so just like a satellite orbits the Earth, these stars are orbiting this black hole, and the gravity of the black hole affects their line of motion. So as an astronomer, you can take your telescope and you don't see the black hole because it's black, but you see the stars, and you trace out these lines that you see in the picture for where the stars are moving. And then with some math, you can figure out exactly where the black hole is. So just by observing the movement of giant, massive objects, we can predict where other massive objects must be for that force of gravity to lead to that path of motion. And this is how we discovered the black hole at the center of the universe. UCLA was really influential in that, so it's pretty awesome. Hopefully I've convinced you that gravity is a huge part of your life and is affecting you all day, every day, and everything that happens around you. In this picture, the rain is falling, that's gravity. We can see the sun, that's gravity. We're orbiting the sun because the sun is more massive than the Earth. We also can see the waves. The tides of the ocean are due to the gravity of the moon in a really complicated way. So if we didn't have our moon, we wouldn't have high and low tide on the ocean. So there's just so much influences of gravity happening all around us because we are out in the universe with these huge, massive bodies, and we have mass too. So don't forget to think about gravity and be curious about it. And that's why it's a great topic to study. Thank you.
Wow, thank you, Sarah, so much for an amazing talk. I learned a lot about gravity, and I hope you guys did too. Sarah can take any questions about her talk now, so please speak up or put your question in the chat.
It looks like people have their hands raised. So how about Sienna and Aria? Do you want to unmute?
Oops.
Not me.
You're not gonna ask my apologies, I guess.
No, hey.
Okay, all right, go ahead and ask that
Well, this is my sister's question, but she doesn't want to say it, so I'm going to say it. She wants to ask how big is the universe and what's on the other side?
Awesome question. There's so many scientists asking that same thing. It's hard to measure how big the universe is, but one thing we can measure is how old is it? And so you were asking about space, like how big is the universe and what's on the other side? But you could also ask, how old is the universe and what happened before it? So I think the universe is about 16 billion years old. I'm not an expert on that, and I'm not an expert on how big it is either, but that's a good question. I hope you figure it out. Rohan.
If you were to go to the center of the Earth, would you float there since all mass is like attracted to the center of the Earth?
Yeah, great question. I think you would. And I think maybe if you were, so let's think about something even bigger than the Earth. If you're near the center of a black hole and you have your body, right, like you're kind of tall and your feet are close to the center and your head is a little further away from the center, then your feet will be pulled in even stronger than your head. So you wouldn't float, you would actually get all stretched out by gravity and the weird gravitational forces. But if you're at the center of the Earth, I think you would float. Sounds right to me.
Okay, thank you.
I think there's questions in the chat. Let me look at those. Is there gravity inside the black hole? Yeah, great question. So there is, and there's gravity inside the Earth. Because think about if you're halfway to the center of the Earth, then some of the mass is on one side of you and some is on the other. So both of those chunks of mass are going to be pulling on you in different directions, and the strongest force will win out. Can you explain weightlessness in Earth orbit? Let me think about it. I think that weightlessness happens because you are moving in like a circular path. I'm not sure about that one, and I don't want to get it wrong. So I'm gonna say sorry, ask a different professor. Let me go through some more in the chat, and then we'll get to Doug. So can you elaborate on gravitational waves? Gravitational waves were predicted in theory before they were actually measured, and it was a huge achievement when they were finally measured because they're super, super small and really hard to detect. So when they measured gravitational waves, it was two stars that had been orbiting each other, and then they were orbiting, and they kept getting closer and closer, and finally combined, I think. And that sent off a huge gravity wave because there was so many gravitational forces and mass going on. And then when they actually combined, I'm pretty sure that was the origin of the gravitational radiation. Doug, what was your question?
Well, zero gravity is very unhealthy for astronauts for a long period of time, as we know. I mean, did you ever see the movie 2001: A Space Odyssey?
A while ago.
Okay. Do you remember the spaceship and how it created, because it was rotating, it created 1G? Well, is there any talk in the scientific community or about creating something like this so that we could actually travel between planets in a safe and healthy manner?
I think in a lot of science fiction, when they have these spaceships, for example, that will like take us off of Earth and save the planet or something, they're always rotating. Just like you were saying, they're always trying to replicate the gravity that we grew up on, because we evolved for 1G. And there was some movie where like a kid was raised on Mars, and that affects the way your body grows and develops, and your bones and how strong they are. If they're not constantly feeling the force of gravity, your body's gonna grow up differently. So definitely, if we were gonna travel between planets, we'd need to replicate 1G, because that's how humans have to survive in the long term.
We'll have to replicate it on Mars or on the moon. I mean, we'll have to somehow replicate it. Otherwise, we're going to get sick.
Yeah.
And be weak bones, not able to stand up even.
Yeah, it's super important. I see a question in the chat from Aiden. Does gravity exist inside the black hole? Oh, we kind of already talked about that one. The answer is yes. But another point on that is that we don't really know that much about what happens inside a black hole. There's a ton of mystery surrounding that. That's why we call them black holes, is because we can't see them, and even light gets sucked into the black hole, which is a whole nother question. Like, how did that happen? So we have to detect them using these indirect methods, like how the planets were orbiting. So does gravity exist inside the black hole? It's actually hard to define what is the inside and what is the outside of a black hole. We don't know what's going on at the very center, but for the most part, we can say, yes, gravity exists inside a black hole. Okay. If there are two stars of the exact same mass, do they orbit each other? Yeah. So this, even if they're not exactly the same, they can be, roughly the same, or sort of the same order of magnitude. And depending on their initial motion, they'll orbit each other. So they have to start off going, kind of towards each other, and then they'll get their path will be tilted, and then they'll just keep spinning. And so one interesting way to think about it, they don't even have to be the exact same mass. So the Earth is pulling down on me, but I have mass too. So I'm pulling the Earth up towards me, and all of you are pulling the Earth towards yourself. But the Earth force wins out because it's so much bigger. So then the Earth doesn't really move that much. But as a thought experiment, if all the humans and all the animals on Earth came to like California, if we all came to one spot, could we pull the Earth towards us? In theory, that should be possible because we have mass, so the Earth should be affected by wherever we are too. I'm not sure if it would be the right amount of mass, but that's the idea. Would merging black holes cause a gravity wave? Absolutely. That would be a huge one. That's something that scientists are looking for all the time. Every time they find gravity waves, they try to trace it back to something they saw in the universe, like collisions of a binary star system, or even a black hole collision. I don't know if that's been detected yet. Does moving my arm generate Yes, Max, moving your arm generates gravitational waves. Okay, any more questions? I love talking about gravity with you all.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So theoretically, if you're in like empty space 0G, if you had a very small object and you put your hand near it, eventually would it move towards you because of your gravity?
Yes. But once we're thinking on small scales, there's other forces that come into play. Like, have you heard of electromagnetic forces? That is, between positives and negatives. Two negative charges are repelled, but a positive and negative come together. So once we're on the really small scale, there's gravity attracting things, but then if two things have the same charge, they'll be repelled, and then there's other forces. So when we think about that, we have to calculate how strong are all these different forces, and which one dominates. So like on the order of atoms and electrons, it's the electromagnetic force that dominates the motion and repels them. And the gravity is not strong enough to hold them together. But then on the scale of stars and planets, the gravity is the dominant force, and the electromagnetic forces still play a role, but the overall motion can be predicted by gravity. So if you were in space and there was some dust, and then you entered as like a big human, a lot of dust would come towards you. The gravity would be small, but okay, I'm looking at this question in the chat about zero gravity. So when we say 1G, that means the gravity on Earth. We've like defined G to be the gravitational force that you feel as a human standing on the surface of the Earth. So when we just call it that, so that when you go to other planets, we can talk about it like in reference to the Earth. For example, we'll say the moon has less than 1G when you're standing on the moon. And then maybe if you were on a more massive planet, there'd be more than 1G, or it's kind of like that. So zero gravity would have to be like the absence of all mass, I think. Otherwise, if there's two things with mass, they'll always have some gravity. Great questions, everyone. Thank you.
Yeah, those were some really awesome questions. We have time for one last question. If anybody has one more question about gravity or black holes or the universe. Anybody? All right, I think Doug has a question.
Yeah, so is gravity the same thing as dark energy that holds the entire universe together, perhaps? Or is it a relationship?
So dark energy, we call it dark because we don't really understand it yet. And so I wouldn't say it's the same as gravity. But have you heard of dark matter? So the reason we know that dark matter exists is because we track the motion of things and we calculate, what gravitational forces would lead to this motion. And then we find that there's something missing, some matter that we can't see, but that must be causing these objects to move in a certain way. So gravity has a lot to do with dark matter and how we have decided where dark matter is and what we know about it. But as for dark energy, I think that is its own whole thing that we have to discover.
Okay, and I think that's all we have time for. Thank you so much, Sarah. Everybody give her a round of applause.
Okay, I'm gonna leave this.
All right, and if anybody wants to stay on for the next speaker, Fun with Plastics, that will be starting at 2:30. And for everybody else, you can also check out all of the booth activities if you haven't already. And we're actually giving away stickers at a lot of the booths. So go to the booth and ask them how you can get the stickers. So just a reminder, the booths can be found on our website under booths. And everybody, thank you so much, Sarah. And I look forward to seeing you at the other activities at EYU. Thank you so much for coming.
Thanks, everyone.
Rubber bands and a plastic Ziploc bag and some balloons. And if you think about it, if you think about rubber bands, what is it? It's rubber. And where does rubber come from? Well, rubber comes from a tree. And I'm going to start with a little experiment here. And this is with a Ziploc bag. It's something you can do at home. It's something I like to do in person. Just be sure you talk to your parents before you do it. It's called the magic bag trick. And what we're going to do is we're going to take a Ziploc and some sharpened pencils, and we're going to fill the Ziploc with water, seal it up, and stick the pencil in. What do you think is going to happen when we stick the pencil in? Well, you might think that it will leak. But plastics are really cool because they're stretchable. And so here's the water going into the Ziploc bag. So as I said, you can do this at home. Just make sure you've got a little container under you. And I like to do this with a gallon Ziploc because it's more fun. You can take a pencil, and you can put it in. There you go. And you can push it all the way through. And look at that, nothing happens, it doesn't leak. And this is because the polymer strands simply reform and they mold themselves around the pencil. And you can do this with as many pencils as you want or other objects. Of course, you can't pull it out because if you do, it will start to leak. But it's a fun experiment to do, and you can do it at home. All right, so where do these polymers come from? Well, originally they came from the sap of trees. So there's a tree known as the gutta-percha tree, or in Brazil, the Hevea brasilia tree. And if we were together, I actually had a conference in Brazil and I visited a lab that worked on rubber, and they gave me some of the sap from the tree, and it's white. Now, when you think of rubber, like rubber tires, of course, it's not white. So what do? They used to have white tires, but they realized they got dirty by the time you got home. People didn't like that. So they add carbon black to make them black. And some people still like white tires. So they have a white stripe. They call them white wall tires. But the trick is, how do you go from this white sap, and the Native Americans used to use it to play ball with, but it had a problem, and that is, if you leave it sit, the ball will kind of sag. And so it took a guy named Goodyear, you've heard of Goodyear tires, and he was playing around with this sap and some sulfur on, and he accidentally heated it up, and it caused it to form a solid. And we had Goodyear tires, and he called it vulcanization. And it's really just the sulfur causing a chemical reaction. And here it is. So there's Charles Goodyear, and here's his supposed kitchen that he's playing with. And here's the sulfur, and it makes these what are called crosslinks. And from that, he turned this polymer, this sap that would run all over, into tires. And we use this process today, and he called it vulcanization after the god Vulcan. And here's a bunch of rubber things. You may know an eraser. If you go to England, they're called rubbers. Why? Because they're used to rub off pencil lead. And again, some more rubber bands. And if you take a rubber band and you pull on it, there's an experiment I like to do where you pull on it and you put in some energy, and when you release it, you release that energy, and you can feel the rubber band getting hot and cold. Now, rubber has a property called creep, and that is a time-dependent change. And we know this because if you take a deck of cards and you put a rubber band on and you come back a couple years later, you'll find that that rubber band often snaps or is broken. And the reason is, if you put tension on a polymer are these long strands. They're millions of units long. And so you can think of springs that are coiled up millions of units long. And if you keep pulling on it, eventually they pull past each other and the springs don't know how to get back to where they were. So rubber band works many times, but it doesn't work forever. And if you leave it in the stretch position, it will eventually break. And that's a process called creep. All right. Here's a fun experiment that I also like to do. This is sticking a balloon into liquid nitrogen. So let's take a look at this one.
Frostbite Theater presents Cold Cuts, no baloney.
Just science. Hi, I'm Joanna.
And I'm Steve.
And this is a container of liquid nitrogen.
And this is a really big balloon.
Let's see what happens when we place the balloon in the liquid nitrogen.
Okay. Oh, wait. Isn't the balloon gonna pop?
We'll see.
Oh, man.
Now, you notice the balloon shrinking. So you got to think about, why is it shrinking?
Okay, so the balloon didn't pop. There's obviously a hole in the balloon somewhere because the air is leaking. So maybe instead of popping, maybe the balloon just got really cold and it cramped like an egg, and all the air is slowly leaking out of the crack.
Well, if that's the case, what's the balloon going to do when I take it out?
Nothing. It's a balloon with a hole in it and all the air's gone.
Well, I'd say the air is still in the balloon.
So where's the air?
Right there.
That's water.
Nope. Without water, it'd be frozen solid. That's liquid air.
What?
Yeah, so it's pretty cool.
When we place the balloon in the liquid nitrogen, the air inside the balloon gets really cold. When particles of a gas get cold, they start to slow down and take up less space. If we can get the gas cold enough, we can change it from a gas to a liquid. That's what happened inside the balloon. We changed all the particles of nitrogen and oxygen to a liquid.
So how do I get my balloon back?
We just have to place it someplace hot, like the table.
Yeah, so this is cool. So they liquefied the air. Mainly they took the oxygen and turned it into a liquid, and now it blows it back up the balloon.
Making the liquid air inside boil.
And so fun experiment to do.
Frostbite.
All right, so now we get to some really important questions. Which plastics can be recycled? Anybody want to guess? Good guess. Anything with a number can be recycled. So it could have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, or 7. And so, for example, one of my favorite polymers is PET, polyethylene terephthalate. That's your Coke bottle. And then there's high-density polyethylene, there's low-density polyethylene, there's polyvinyl chloride, polypropylene, polystyrene, and others. So we'll take a look at some of these. Okay. Now, why should you recycle polymers? Well, if you don't, they end up in a garbage dump. And that's a real problem because polymers don't degrade very rapidly. They can stick around for hundreds or thousands of years. And there's people who study garbage dumps, and one of the things they do is they just drill into the dump, and to figure out how old the dump is, they pull out newspapers, because once you put a layer of garbage and then you put a layer of plastic down and keep the air out, nothing decomposes. So you can actually read the label on the newspaper. All right. Anybody have any idea what this object is? Well, if you're a scientist, it might look like a test tube, but actually it's a Coke bottle. So here it's polyethylene terephthalate, it's number 1, it's PET. And what they do is they take this object and they stick it in, they heat it up, and they force hot air in, and they blow it into a mold, and you end up with a bottle. Of course, if you put a coloring agent, the bottle could be blue, it could be clear, it could be green, depending on what the soda is. But you can make these, and of course, these are highly recyclable. We often charge a dime because we want to encourage people to bring them back. And here's a Coke bottle, and you can see they used to make them in 2 parts because they couldn't make the bottom strong enough, but now they figured out how to make the bottom a little bit thicker, and so they make them in 1 piece. And even they'll tell you now that they want you to recycle them with a cap back on, because even the cap is recyclable. So just when you finish these, put the cap on, save them up, and bring them back to the store. All right, anybody know what this is? Yeah, hopefully you look at this and you say, hey, that's a cool container. I can get frosting out of it. Maybe you like chocolate frosting, vanilla frosting. Well, if you think about it, what are these? They're plastics. And there's 2 different kinds of plastics. The lid has to be really flexible. So that's going to be low density polyethylene. And the base has to be a little stiffer. That's going to be high density polyethylene. So there we go. So the high density stuff is number 2, HDPE. And the low density stuff is number 4. And what is polyethylene? It's just a long chain of carbon. And each carbon's bonded to 2 others, and there's a couple hydrogens. And these chains are in the order of 1 million units long. And if you pack them really tightly together, you get the high density form, and a little bit less packed, you get the low density form. And they're both exceedingly useful. All right, who knows what this is? Yep, these are balloons, but they're special balloons that you might get on your birthday. You might call them Mylar balloons. So what are Mylar balloons? Well, they're usually filled with helium, or they could be. And in the old days, if you just had a latex balloon that's made from that sap from the gutta percha tree, those would leak eventually. You couldn't put helium in, they would only last a day. But these Mylar balloons will last weeks and sometimes months. And you just don't want to let them go outside because they get tangled up in lines and can cause shorts. But how do they work? Well, they're metallated plastics. And so if you look at this, now they just use polyethylene. Originally they used polyethylene terephthalate, but they run it this way and then they metallize it. They put a thin coat of aluminum, and that makes it impervious to gases. And so this will keep helium in here, and if you get a good balloon, it might last for months. Now this orientation is really important because now I'm going to tell you the most important thing you're going to learn today. And that is how to open a ketchup pack or a mustard pack or soy sauce. I'm sure you've all opened these packages and you get it all of yourself or somebody else. And it's very frustrating. And you may wonder, how should I open these? Well, if we understand what they're made out of, we'll know how to open them. So first of all, they're plastic that's metallated. These are Mylar. And that plastic is polyethylene. And if you were making this, would you orient the plastic the long way or the short way? Well, I'm sure you'd probably choose the long way. So basically, if you look here, that's the orientation of the polymer. So if it says tear here and there's a perforation, then believe it, tear there. But sometimes you have no perforation, you should always tear it the long way. And here's one, you can look at this soy sauce package and you see it says tear here. Well, that's correct, it's the long way. But occasionally it will say tear here. Well, no, you should tear it this way, the long way. So there you go. We know how to open these now because we know how they're made, and therefore we know the orientation. Here's another one that's interesting, polyvinyl chloride, PVC. Now, most of you probably know this as pipes for water and hoses, and you can actually use this in your house, but it's also in the laboratory, we call it Tygon tubing. And you may wonder, how can this stiff thing in this tubing thing be the same thing? Well, the way it works is they put plasticizing agents in it. And if we were together, I've got some where we have this tubing and we ran it through some organic chemicals. It took out the plasticizing agent and it gets really stiff. So you can make this in different forms. They used to use this for baby toys, but the plasticizing agent would come out of this, and not a good thing for little kids. So now they use longer chain things that don't come out. But here's polyvinyl chloride. It's just these polymer chains with a chlorine group on each side. And so this is number 3. It's got lots and lots of uses. In fact, you may have heard of a vinyl dashboard in the car. Well, what is vinyl? That's a shortcut name for polyvinyl chloride, PVC. So this is the same stuff. And what happens is they used to have this thing called new car smell, and some of your parents probably like this. And what that is, the plasticizing agent in the vinyl would come out after you get a car. And especially when it's new, it smells like new car. Well, you're breathing some organic chemicals. So now they figured out how to make longer chains so they don't come out, but some people still like that smell. And so if you go to a car wash, you can ask them to spray some ethers into your car that smell like new car smell. All right, here's another one. Your parents may have said that sometimes you sound like a broken record, and you probably wonder what that is. Well, here are records, and they're often called vinyl records because they're usually made of polyvinyl chloride and polyvinyl acetate. And if your parents tell you that you sound like a broken record, it's because there's a needle that reads the grooves, and as it goes around, it plays a song. But if one of these grooves is damaged, it will go around the same track over and over again. So if you're saying the same thing over and over again, your parents might say like you sound like a broken record. All right, here's another one, polypropylene. This is number 5. And polypropylene is what you get your sandwiches in, but it's also used to make dishes. And all it is, a propyl group has a carbon coming off the main chain. So these are often known as methyl groups, and this is polypropylene because here's a propyl group, and we make chains that are 1,000,000 units long. Now we get to peanuts, which is polystyrene, which is number 6. And the question is, can you recycle peanuts? Can you eat peanuts? Anybody want to guess the answer to the question, can you eat these peanuts? No, I hear no. Well, if they're made out of polystyrene, you're correct. You can't eat the peanuts. But it turns out that these days you can get peanuts made out of cornstarch, which is a natural polymer. It's a thickener. It's often used for soups and things. And you can eat that. And how can you tell? Well, if these things start dissolving in water, then you can eat them. If they don't, if they're impervious, then you better leave them alone. But polystyrene, you probably know as styrofoam. And here's styrofoam balls, here's styrofoam cups. These are all number 6, polystyrene. All right, and here are cornstarch peanuts. So if you've ever seen these, they look like polystyrene peanuts, but they're not. They're made out of cornstarch, and they're fun because if you just put a drop of water, you can lick them if you like, you can make beautiful animals. And they come in different colors. They put food coloring in. And so you can play with these. And so they're very easy to recycle. You can just dissolve them in water, or you can reuse them. But they're cornstarch peanuts, so they're completely edible. I'm not suggesting you do that, but you could. All right, here's another one that's interesting. This is called silicone. And silicone is a polymer. It's unlike the other ones, which are just carbon chains. This is a silicon-oxygen chain, but it's very useful. Depending on how linked together it is, we have silicone that we use for waterproofing, like in showers and bathrooms. And you can make cookware. And here's a bread pan. Here's a cupcake pan. If you're gonna make cupcakes, these are great to make it in because you can just pop them out. Or you can even have cupcake holders. If you're a really good cook, you might not like the bread pan because really good cooks like a metal pan, so it puts a nice crust on the bread. This is gonna cook the bread a bit more evenly. But that's great for cupcakes, it's great for cookies. All right, here's the big question of the day. How many polymer molecules are there in a bowling ball? Anybody want to guess? You think there's 1 million, 10 million, 100 million? Well, those are all good guesses because we might start off with billions and billions, but it turns out the answer is just 1. Yeah, how can that be? Well, it turns out a bowling ball is completely cross-linked. So every chain is connected to every other chain, and that's how they make it. They start with a polymer and they cross-link it. And so there's just one polymer, it's called polyurethane. You make this, but every chain is linked to every other chain. So technically, there's just one molecule in a bowling ball. You can impress your friends with that question. All right, here is a movie, I think. Is there a movie? Ah, wait, we got the movie starting. Let's see if I can get it to go.
Maybe, Professor, if you go on the slide and click the screen, I think it starts.
Oh, I see. I ended up, I've got to get rid of my laser pointer as the thing. There we go. Oh, this is polyurethane foam. Here we go. See if this works.
This is the polyurethane foam kit from Flint Scientific. Usually when you do this demonstration in your classroom, you can make about 15 demos this size.
I love making these milkshakes.
Today in the Flint studios, we're gonna see what we can do with 10 kits.
So they're making polyurethane foam. Pretty cool, huh? All he did is they added food coloring into a polyurethane mixture, part A and part B. See, if anybody tells you chemistry is not a lot of fun, you can tell them differently. And you can buy these kits. There are some plastic stores around. And even you can go to a boat repair shop and they'll sell you these kits because people use this to seal holes in boats. They use it to do insulation in houses. A truck will come to your house and fill your walls with polyurethane foam. This is the same stuff that your car seats are made out of and your couches. So the next time you go in the car and sit down, or your foam mattress, this is what's in there. It's polyurethane. And it's just filled with gas. And it makes really nice things. Oh, wait, they're not done yet. I think they're going backwards now. All right, that's pretty good. All right, here's another experiment that you can do at home. Has anybody seen these? They're called Grobies.
These in the water and they started to grow. We even read a story. Mark, will you show the book there? Because early childhood teachers are amazing at tying literature with pieces of, or the experiments. So this is Zach's alligator, really about a book, a little alligator that grows. And Shirley had no idea, Shirley Moselle, who wrote it, had no idea that people were really doing this.
The gator's in your pocket.
You got it. All right, you guys ready? All right, let's slide this over.
Okay.
Ready? Are you guys ready? 3,
How long have these been
2,
growing?
1, about 4 days. Ready?
Okay.
Ta-da!
Oh my God!
So these started out about...
Bigger he is, isn't it? Are you ready? Who wants to hold Clyde? Okay, hang on to Clyde. Okay.
So I've got ones that start out the size of your thumb and they end up
Here you go.
300 times bigger.
So do you see how these? Oh, that's okay. Look at this. So here are these huge growing creatures.
How much
And all we have to
fun
do is
is
put them in
that?
the water. And the secret is the baby's diaper. So I kind of put all this stuff on the website so people can learn about the diaper secret. But this is the way to go now with growing creatures. And there's plenty of science. Count, compare, classify, observe, measure.
So the way this stuff works is these are partially cross-linked polymers. And so they suck in water, they expand, but they don't fall apart. They don't dissolve. If you didn't have the cross links, they couldn't expand. And if you have too many cross links, you end up with a bowling ball. And so these are often called grow beasts. You can buy them in the store and they'll get to 300 times their original size or more. And then you can dry them out and they'll shrink back up. I've got a brain in my office. It started as the size of your thumb, grows up to be a brain. And then if you let it dry out, it shrinks up. Okay, so I think that concludes what I want to tell you, and I'm happy to answer questions that you have. I'll put up this bowling ball so we can have something to look at.
Thank you so much, Professor. That's amazing. I love the videos. That's so cool.
Ooh, I see a hand up.
Yes. Would you like to? So we have Nahalia and George. Professor, would you like to answer one of their questions?
Please.
Maybe Nahalia, do you wanna ask a question?
Yes. Thank you, Professor. The videos are so amazing and cool. As someone who's concerned about nature and stuff, the one where they were growing it and it looked like a big popsicle sundae.
Yes.
What happens to that as far as like trash? Because I've always been told, and when I've looked into research, that styrofoam or styrofoam type products are actually not recyclable.
So it is, if they have a number on them, they are recyclable, but are they reused is the question that you're really asking. And it turns out these days that even recyclable polymers, many of them are not used. It depends on the price for that polymer. So number one, the polyethylene terephthalate, your Coke bottle, that will be recycled because it's a very valuable polymer. But most of the other ones, all they can do is melt them down and make park benches out of them or make traffic cones and traffic stops out of them. So right now, if you do recycle, they do tend to put them separately in the landfill. And someday when it's valuable enough, they'll go back and dig them up and reuse them. Now, there is something in my lab, I can recycle polyurethane because it turns out that polystyrene, because it dissolves in certain organic solvents. So I can put it in acetone and I can take a huge styrofoam thing and make it into almost nothing. I can take away all the air. But you're right that a lot of them don't get recycled, and that is a major problem. And most of this stuff comes from petroleum these days. When they refine petroleum, they take out gases like ethylene and they make polyethylene out of it, and propylene and make polypropylene. So great question. I think we have some more.
We do. Thank you so much for the question. Thank you, Professor. Before we go into further, actually, thank you, George and Rohan. I see you guys. Would you have, we are wondering if you guys are okay with us, we want to capture these amazing moments with Professor. We want to capture this amazing event. Would you guys be okay if we use a screenshot of your beautiful faces in something after, just to recap the event? Is that okay with you guys? I think that applies to George, Rohan, Rokas. If you guys are okay with that, just please give us a thumbs up or ask your parents if that's okay. Yeah, you guys look amazing. Okay, thank you so much. Okay, so next we have George, right? George, thank you so much for your patience. Please feel free to ask Professor if you have any questions.
So the bowling ball, it's just one extremely long string. So theoretically, you're just holding pretty much one of the largest molecules possible.
That's exactly right. So it starts off with chains that are on the order of 1 million units long, and there are billions of them when they put the bowling ball together. However, after you make the polyurethane, which is what bowling balls are made out of, it's cross-linked. They put this agent in that puts links between all the chains. And so you're right, you end up with essentially just one unit. So yes, it's essentially the biggest molecule that's ever been made. Of course, you could make a bigger bowling ball if you wanted one, but it's the same process that Goodyear did to vulcanize rubber, where you put cross-links between the rubber molecules, and that's how come we have car tires. And until then, we didn't know how to, make tires.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Excellent question. Do you think that answers your question, George? Does that make sense? Thank you. Big thumbs up. I like the watch. Rohan, you also raised your hand. Thank you for your patience. Well, would you like to ask your question, please?
How do the types of plastics get classified with the numbers?
Another good question. I'm going to see if I can go back a little bit. And maybe not the most exciting slide, but you can see the different numbers here, right? So each of these numbers represents a different polymer. So the most basic of the polymers is polyethylene, which is just a carbon chain going along with 2 hydrogens coming off of each carbon. And that comes in high density form, that's 2, and low density form, that's 4. If you put a chlorine off each carbon-carbon bond, you get polyvinyl chloride. So there's a different polymer. And this one's a polyethylene terephthalate. It's a bit more complicated, a bit more expensive. But most of these are just simply, this is a chloride coming off the chain. Polypropylene is a carbon coming off the chain. Polystyrene is a ring. And so they're simply classified by the monomer, the basic building block that makes the polymer. So you have a monomer. If you put 2 together, it's called a dimer. 3 is a trimer. Longer is a ligamer. And when you get to tens of thousands or millions of units, we call it a polymer. Yeah, good question.
Thank you.
Great. Oh, that's so polite. Thank you, Rohan. I've seen you around today. You've been sticking around so much. Just want to say good job today. Okay, thank you, Professor, as well. We also have a question from Tyler. Guys, feel free if you have questions to leave in the chat or raise your hand. We'll get to you. Tyler asks, Professor, is silicone made of silicone made of silicon?
Oh, wow. This is a good question. And in fact, some of my colleagues have trouble with this one too. So I want to explain that. And I'm going to see if I can find the silicone. Here it is. Okay, so you are correct in that silicone, the polymer, has silicon, the element in it. Also, people confuse this with silica, which is another name for sand or quartz. So silica is SiO2. Silicon, the element, is just Si, and it's a semiconductor. It looks metallic, but it's a semiconductor. But silicone, the polymer, is a silicon bonded to 2 oxygens and 2 carbons. And this forms a long polymer chain. Again, it can be tens of thousands to hundreds of thousands or even millions of units long. And when it gets that long, we can make it into these different things. We can make it into baking pans. We can make it into caulking. And if you have a rain gear, like a raincoat or galoshes, they're made out of silicone and they're waterproof. So it's a really useful polymer. And you can, of course, you can bake with it, which means it goes to high temperatures. But it even works when you go into freezing. If you go into the snow in the mountains, it still remains flexible. And that's because its glass transition temperature is way below 0. So someday you'll learn about glass transition temperatures. But suffices to say, with a low glass transition temperature, it remains flexible even in snow.
Oh, wow, we still have a lot more to learn, I guess. Does that answer your question, Tyler? Yes, Tyler says yes. Thank you, Tyler. We have one more question, Professor, if that's okay, and then we can wrap this up. One last question from Linda. Linda asked, what is BPA in plastics?
Okay, so in order to make a plastic flexible, and I'm going to go to the dashboard if I can find it. Here we go. So we don't want on a cold day that the dashboard shrinks, on a warm day it expands and then it cracks. And if you talk to your grandparents, they all have cracked dashboards from when they were growing up. You don't get that anymore because they put these plasticizing agents. And that's what DBA is. It's a plasticizing agent that goes into these polymers. And one of my favorite ones is diactyl phthalate ester. And so the phthalate ester is the thing that gives you the new car smell. So a lot of people like that smell, but of course it is a volatile organic compound. And so if you smell a little bit of it, that's fine, but I wouldn't want to hang around a new car for too long. But it is what makes this polymer or plastic flexible. And if you take that out, if you let this sit in the hot sun for a long time and it comes out, that dashboard will crack. And so another way to look at that, if you look at this tubing, that is the same polymer as this hose, but this has lots of plasticizing agent and this doesn't. This just has some fillers in it. So another really excellent question. And as I said, if you take the plasticizing agent out, and we've done that by accident, this hose, this flexible hose, will become completely stiff as this pipe. So man, you guys asked really good questions.
Thank you so much, Professor, for the explanation. Guys, you know, you guys have amazing questions. We also want to respect Professor's time. Professor, what if people have more questions or more interested, would you recommend some resources for people to look into more, or some websites maybe? What do you think, Professor?
Yeah, no, I think if you just Google polymers or fun with polymers, you can find some of the videos that I did. In fact, you can find, there's even ones with larger amounts of polymers. There's volcano things. There's all sorts of fun things you can find. So I will wish you all good luck and keep interest in science is one of the most fun things to do.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you guys. Thank you guys. Guys, please, if you enjoyed this talk, enjoyed this time, just let's say thank you to Professor for spending time and preparing this for us. Everyone send, have a good day. Yeah, guys, would you guys mind if we take a pictures together?